When you think of the Need for Speed franchise, you probably think of street racing. You might even picture the Fast and Furious movies, at least the early ones before the family turned into superheroes. With its extensive visual customization, nitros, drag races, and Japanese import cars, the golden era of the franchise was a world away from more simulation-focused games like Gran Turismo or Forza. And that's how it was for a long time. But with an ever-increasing frequency of new releases and sales numbers that weren't growing at the same speed, it was inevitable that the traditional formula would become saturated, especially with competition from both new and old franchises like Midnight Club, Grid, Project Gotham Racing, and even MotorStorm. The time had come for EA to make a change in the series, and this transformation would take Need for Speed to a track-based racing game. And I'd say that, surprisingly, the result was positive. Need for Speed Shift isn't just an example of the franchise's identity crisis, but perhaps a missed opportunity. By being constrained by the expectation of what a Need for Speed game should be, maybe this game lost its chance to be something different and to forge its own path. And it's important to remember that this move toward closed circuits and, let's say, not so illegal racing had already begun with Need for Speed Pro Street 2 years earlier. However, unlike what would happen in Shift, the essence of street racing and tuner culture was still very much present in Pro Street. The events took place at a festival where cars were tuned up to compete in races more akin to the traditional Need for Speed games, with a stronger focus on visual customization, drag, and drift events. But with the winds of change blowing and successful examples of track-based arcade racers like Project Gotham Racing and especially the recent success of Grid, the task given to Slightly Mad Studios was to continue down this road. But this time the change would be even bigger. Need for Speed Shift introduces real-world circuits and a greater focus on supercars and even hypercars, with traditional racing as the main event. And as soon as you start the game, this change is immediately clear. You won't find any attractive ladies on the screen talking to you or a story of revenge and betrayal to follow here. Instead, you get a quick explanation of your single focus, competing in the Need for Speed World Tour. The game wastes no time, putting you straight into a BMW for a tutorial race. This is designed not only to get you familiar with the controls and the game's handling, but also to test your skills and set a suggested difficulty. After a few more basic explanations, you're thrown directly into the career mode. There are no cutscenes, enemies, or police chases. With so many drastic changes, moving so far away from street racing and the Fast and Furious vibe, it's natural to wonder what the real appeal is here. And my answer is the attention to detail. After just a few races, it becomes clear that Need for Speed Shift isn't just another game slapped together to cash in on a successful franchise. From the incredible first-person camera, which reminded me a bit of Drive Club, to the wavy heat effect behind the car before the race starts, or even the heavy breathing and scream your driver lets out during a heavy crash, the atmosphere in this game remains excellent. Obviously, for a game called Need for Speed, the sense of speed is essential, and here again, Shift deserves praise. In the cockpit view, you can see the driver's vision start to blur as they try to focus on the track at higher speeds. In the external camera, you get not just a sense of speed, but also of motion. The camera isn't fixed, it shakes to show that your car isn't just floating, but racing on circuits with elevation changes, where new and old layers of asphalt aren't always perfectly level. The controller vibration is also used to further amplify the sensation. The camera movement during braking also emphasizes the brutal deceleration, and the struggle of both the car and your body to overcome the kinetic force and slow down. But it's not all praise. Need for Speed Shift has a user score of 66 on Metacritic, and a large portion of the complaints are focused on one aspect of the game, the handling model. And for a racing game, that's a huge problem. The cars slide more than they should, and oversteer is a constant presence. How your car will behave is never quite predictable, and considering there is no rewind feature in this game, mistakes can cost you dearly. This is one of those games that can push many players away within the first 2 or 3 races, as it takes some time to get used to the handling and for corners to become more manageable. And even though you can eventually get used to it, it doesn't mean it's good. On PC there are even mods to improve the handling model, but since my goal here was to provide a neutral review, I played the vanilla version of the game with no mods. The only concession I made was keeping the suggested racing line on the entire time. And this brings me to one of my criticisms of Shift. The UI, at least in its default version, is very cluttered. On top of that, it's hard to see what position you're in or even to just enjoy the view. One nice detail though is that the speedometers in the third-person camera are the actual models from the real cars. It's not a groundbreaking feature, but it's another testament to the attention to detail present here. In any case, what becomes clear is that this game makes no attempt to pass itself off as a simulator or to compete with Gran Turismo or Forza. The campaign itself encourages aggression. You earn points for precision driving, but also for trading paint or even pushing opponents off the track, actions that would get you penalized in games focused on realism. And the overall attention to detail is clear here. This isn't just some lazy cash grab using the Need for Speed name for easy sales. In fact, it seems to be the opposite. What we have is an excellent simcade that in some ways feels held back by the constraints of being a Need for Speed. And one of its limitations, or perhaps one of its less developed aspects, is that the career mode is straightforward, maybe even too straightforward. Your goal is to compete in the Need for Speed World Tour, and to get there you start in Tier 1 and work your way up to Tier 5. And that's it. It's basically just a checklist of events with no real sense of progression or narrative. The absence of a story, especially considering the lack of creativity shown in other Need for Speed games, isn't necessarily a bad thing. But this feeling that you're just racing in one event after another from a list doesn't get you invested in the campaign's progression. You're told there's a rival to beat in this tier or that one, but it fails to generate any attachment or additional interest. What does bring some novelty are the mini challenges within each race, which award stars and help you progress through the levels. These challenges range from mastering every corner and earning a set number of points to even making opponents spin out. And this brings me to the topic of aggression. Unlike in traditional simulator, penalties are basically non-existent in Shift. As long as you don't cut corners or drive the wrong way, you're pretty much free to do anything else. But that means your opponents have the same freedom. And getting knocked off the track, especially near the end of the race, is never as fun as it sounds. The AI in this game is aggressive, even causing accidents among themselves, and that's another factor you have to take into consideration during events. Eventually, with enough stars, you reach the Need for Speed World Tour, which consists of 2 championships and a final race at Brands Hatch. You win that race, the credits roll, and that's it. It's hard not to feel like it was just another race to cross off the checklist. With its greater focus on realism and closed circuits, the game doesn't get too creative with its event types either. Most of them are traditional races or variations like time attack, lap knockout races and time trials, along with endurance championships featuring much longer races. The main thing that breaks this mode are the drift events, which I struggled to learn at first, but after getting the hang of it they end up being pretty fun. However, the number of stars available in the campaign is so generous that if you're not a fan of drifting or endurance, you can focus almost exclusively on the other event types. But with such similar events, and with only drifting offering something truly different, the lack of variety quickly becomes apparent. The sense of progression ends up feeling more tied to the cars you're using. And with so many different ways to earn stars and generous rewards, whether from winning events, championships, or just leveling up, a lack of cash was never an issue during the campaign. Whenever I moved up a tier, I could afford to pick the best car available or just my personal favorite and tune it until it was super competitive. Now at first glance, the vehicle variety might not seem that impressive. The base game features 65 cars, with a Ferrari DLC later adding a few more models, but I'd say this is a clear case of quality over quantity. You have the expected supercars and hypercars of the era, like the Bugatti Veyron, Pagani Zonda, Porsche 911 GT3, and Koenigsegg CCX. You also get classics that, at least for me, are a must-have in any racing game, like the Honda NSX and McLaren F1. And of course, there are the familiar franchise staples, like the Supra, Skyline, RX-7, and Lancer. Visual customization is limited to changing the rims and their color or adding vinyls, something I ended up ignoring completely since the effect is minimal, the races take place during the day, and this clearly isn't the focus of this game. You can add body kits, spoilers, and a custom exhaust, but you can't choose specific models. But when it comes to performance tuning, not all cars are created equal. Not every model can be used in drift events, equipped with nitro, or get the works conversion, which allows a car like the NSX, for example, to compete in higher tiers than it could otherwise handle. And the most impressive part is seeing these changes, especially in the first-person camera. When you add a roll cage or apply a weight reduction to your vehicle, the car's interiors change along with it, which is yet another example of the attention to detail poured in by the development team. And even though the car count isn't massive, the game ensures you switch things up pretty often. Some events will land you a car, like in the Invitationals or car battles, while others require a specific model, like in the American vs European cars or Works vs Stock Championships. This means you'll be changing vehicles with a good frequency. And that's a great thing. Not just for the challenge of driving different models, but because it brings some much needed variety to the experience. With 18 circuits, the track selection is varied enough and features well-known names like Silverstone, Spa, Brands Hatch, and Laguna Seca. The digital recreations here aren't aiming to be photorealistic replicas of the real-world circuits like in a Gran Turismo or Forza, but they're good enough and bring a more arcade-like feel to their presentation. What I missed here was having the creative freedom to imagine a few street circuits, like those found in Project Gotham Racing or even the older Gran Turismo games. Since Need for Speed Shift sits on this threshold between realism and arcade, it would have been fun to race through a street circuit in Rome, Paris, or New York, but that opportunity wasn't taken. Finally, the sound design, at least during the races, is pretty immersive. The slightly exaggerated engine roar, the sounds of the gearbox, the wind, and the tires all serve to heighten the immersion and the sense of speed. The soundtrack, on the other hand, at least for me, isn't quite as engaging, whether in the menus or during replays. But fortunately, when it really matters, during the races and when it's time to create that sense of speed and danger, the audio delivers. Need for Speed Shift isn't the best game in the franchise, nor is it the one that comes to mind when you think of the series. But it's a good racing game that has aged well, and that's precisely why I think it was a missed opportunity. It showcases the potential, care, and attention to detail you'd expect from a dedicated developer, but it's a game that ultimately limits itself precisely because it also has to be a Need for Speed. The first-person camera remains impressive even to this day, the races are fun, with the option of mods if you don't like the Handley model, and the sense of speed and danger without the rewind feature makes the gameplay incredibly engaging. If Shift had been given the freedom to be its own game, maybe it could have become something more interesting and unique. Unlike Grid, which managed to become a series with multiple sequels, even if they weren't all that great, Need for Speed Shift would only get one, as the franchise shifted its focus again with The Run in 2011 and Most Wanted in 2012. Looking back now, it's clear that Shift was born with an anchor tied to it, being a Need for Speed instead of its own series, like Grid or Project Gotham Racing. And while the series' identity crisis has never completely gone away, much like Fast and Furious, Need for Speed is one of those franchises that, if you don't love it, you at least love to hate. So if you've never played Shift, I definitely recommend giving it a shot. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like or a comment. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.